My name is Weis. It's my last name. Nobody can pronounce my first name, so I go by Weis. And I founded Packet 39 a few years ago, and we develop virtual reality and augmented reality applications, mostly safety and training stuff, medical, aerospace, and also nuclear power. So I'm just going to dive right into it. This is the nuclear power plant in Darlington, Ontario. It's right outside of Toronto. Let's see if this works. Yeah. And nuclear power is actually one of the safest form and cleanest form of energy. But obviously, it has some need for training. And let's talk about the problem we're trying to solve. So this is the reactor core. This is a Canadian design called the Can-Do design. I'm not sure if it's available anywhere else in the world. But it has a few unique properties where, if you've seen movies where the fuel rods are in a big pool, glowing, in this design, it's vertical. And the fuel channels hold highly radioactive material. And sometimes when people need to work or replace these channels, they open up the cap. And when the cap is open on the fuel channels, and each one of these little tubes is a fuel channel, a radiation beam shoots out. And of course, the radiation beam is invisible. The shape is depending on what's inside of the tube. And walking into the beam can kill you, or worse, put you on leave vacation, a paid vacation. That was a joke, by the way. And their solution to training on how not to step into the beam of death, that's basically what we're trying to do here. Don't step into the giant beam of death, okay? And their solution was to put tape on the floor. So you can see in this case, this channel is open. This, by the way, this is not the real thing. This is a mock-up that they use for training. It's a one-to-one replica, costs almost as much, and they use it extensively for training. And in this case, this fuel channel is supposedly open, and this is the beam that shoots out, and this guy's about to die. And obviously, like, the tape works. You can see it on the floor, but it has its limitations. So with them, we kind of suggested, OK, let's do this with augmented reality. It's a perfect application for this. And the first step is choosing the hardware. This is the project that we started 2 years ago, a bit even more. So bear with me with the hardware which we're going through. And we went through a bunch of different headsets, sometimes mixed together. Darky has already folded, I believe. Sony, Epson, Google Glass at the time, and of course the HoloLens 1. And we ended up using the HoloLens. And one of the major reasons was that it's actually a certified safety glass. Everybody that sets foot on that reactor mock-up has to be completely covered with the standard safety gear. That includes a helmet and safety and eyewear, eye safety. You have to wear a hard hat at all times inside of that facility. And we messed around a lot with connecting the HoloLens to our hard hat. There were a few products on the market that were not very good. We ended up designing and 3D printing our own. And the happy solution, oh, sorry, let's go back a bit. Back. What came out interesting of this is that after you attach the HoloLens to a hard hat, it's actually much more comfortable. Which nobody really expected. Is anybody here from Microsoft, by the way? OK. It's actually a lot more comfortable with a hard hat than the strap. This whole thing comes out, and it attaches directly to the hard hat. So that was an unexpected surprise. Another set of protective gear that we had to deal with was this called as a rubber suit. And everybody inside training has to be, in some scenarios, have to be wearing this stuff. We use clips here to keep the mask away from the sensors so the HoloLens can function. Alas, the HoloLens was not designed for this application, and people in big, thick rubber gloves cannot really do any gestures and pinching and air tapping. It just doesn't work. So we had to develop a way to trigger all of these stuff remotely, and HoloLens has an API for that. All the web portal, they have a web portal thing, and you can basically tie in directly to the HoloLens through that interface and start and stop apps and do stuff like that. So we had to develop all of that so the administrator can actually start the app remotely, because they can't even do that. Let's talk about more gear that was needed for this project. Everybody inside of this application had to be wearing a dosimeter, which we needed a fake one that reported fake dose when you walk into the beam of death. We started working with Arduinos and building something that actually looked like this. It needs to be battery-powered remote control. It needs to vibrate and sound an alarm and have a display the dose on it. And our solution eventually was to use a cheap Android phone, right? Because an Android phone already has all this stuff in it. I mean, there's really no need to develop anything for it. It doesn't look like this, but in most cases, it just sits in their pocket or on their lap, and they don't actually look at it. It's more the audio and haptics that are important. And we ended up buying a bunch of cheap phones. The core of the system is the administrative station. And I haven't actually explained what this application does, and I will now. The scenario is this. You have 5 people who are training on how not to step into the beam of death. And they are walking around on, the floor of the reactor core. Here, this is a virtual one. And there's an administrator sitting on one level above and behind them, and he's looking at what's going on. And he needs to see what everybody's current dose is. If they have stepped or grazed the beam of radiation, their virtual dose goes up. And he can see where everybody is in 3D on this virtual platform. And he can see it either in his own headset, so a 6, the number 6 HoloLens in the network, or on the laptop. And he can also control the experience or control the exercise. He can drop hazards, and he can trigger all sorts of alerts. There's a whole training, a bunch of tools that he can use to build a training scenario. Let's talk a little bit about radiation beams themselves. Turns out radiation beams are complicated. Who knew? And the client really only had 2D diagrams, and visualization of transparent 3-dimensional objects on the HoloLens is a bit tricky. What we did is we converted the diagrams into kind of a vector math, and we generated, in real time, we generated these beams. And these correspond to different types of fuel channels, different types of caps, and all sorts of very sensitive material that probably I shouldn't be talking about. And this is what the user sees inside of the HoloLens experience, inside of the AR experience. This is the only part the user sees. This is the real thing, and the floor is going to be the real thing. And they will see the augmented part of this experience is the radiation beam. And the administrator can choose whether or not the trainees can see the radiation beam. So you can start off easy mode, where they can see the giant beam of death, and then switch into hard mode, where they cannot see it, and they just have to figure out how not to step into it. I'm kind of making this a joke, but it is actually complicated because they have to do a lot of work inside of this platform. There's machinery there that they have to walk around. They're carrying tools and equipment. It's actually easier than it seems to accidentally graze this radiation beam. We used the HoloLens also not only because it's a safety glass, but also because it's a pretty good 6 degrees of freedom mapper and tracker. And it worked perfectly inside of that environment. It tracked really nice. We used a printed marker to kind of initialize and start the experience. And after that, the HoloLens would track pretty much perfectly, even if the marker is well out of view and you just walk around this environment. It worked really well. The fixed point of reference in this case is a 2D printed marker that we placed on one of the channels, one of the fuel rods. We also experimented with doing it completely markerless, just using the point cloud as a reference point, because we kind of know what this platform and environment should look like. However, the platform you saw before can actually move up and down, so there's another variable there. And it's a giant elevator. So that became really complicated, and we just opted with a much simpler solution and more robust of a marker. So to put it all together, the system consists of a laptop, a router with a closed network, 6 HoloLenses mounted on hard hats, 5 cheap Android phones, and all of this stuff is sitting on the table here and color-coded. And the software, everything runs on Windows. The client was developed in Unity, including the phone app. Everything was developed in Unity in this project. And here we see it actually in action. This is the administrator station. These are people wearing the HoloLens hard hats down there, the marker to start the experience, the virtual radiation beam that they can see, and 2 points where these 2 people are, and a bunch of information about their dose, their current dose, and all sorts of tools that the operator can have to enhance the experience or to trigger all sorts of events in the training. Rick, can you cue the video? And this is a little video of what the users actually see inside of the HoloLens. I added this nifty animation mostly for them to get a better sense of depth and scale. And it does help when you walk around the beam to have this, kind of sci-fi animation to the radiation beam. And the colors represent intensity because the beam coming out of this thing is not uniform. There's all sorts of interference patterns that create shells. And the operator can also choose which one of these fuel rods are open. Multiple, he can open multiple ones, and so on and so forth. Yeah, we're good. Thank you, Rick. A little bit about limitations we run into the system. Gestures, as I mentioned, are very difficult. The HoloLens field of view is very small, as you all probably know, and that was a very limiting factor. Probably the most limiting factor in this project was the field of view. I'm actually looking forward to trying the HoloLens 2. If somebody from Microsoft can actually answer my emails and sell me one, I will pay for it. There's nobody here from Microsoft, so I'm just talking to the air. And at this point, the HoloLens, original HoloLens 1 hardware is antique. It was very slow, very hard to work with, and battery life is also not great. And what's next for this project? I'm experimenting, or we were experimenting with using Vive trackers as an add-on to do better spatial tracking without markers. Hand tracking would be nice because right now I can only detect when the whole body enters the radiation beam, but I would also want to detect when a limb enters the radiation beam. And of course, upgrading to the HoloLens 2 if I can get my hands on one. That's it. I'm not sure if we have time for questions or if we do questions, but that's all I have today. Thanks.